All right, welcome back. I'm Kaila Henry.
And Kathy Zalewski.
And we are realtors in Bozeman, Montana with Realty One Group Peak. This is episode 7 of our buyer Q&A, so diving a little bit deeper into some of the items that buyers will go through as they buy a home. And today, episode 7 is about inspections. So, Kathy, who typically schedules the home inspection when a buyer's working with you?
Right. So we've got the contract accepted, and that's after I instruct my buyers to go drop off their earnest money, then we definitely want to get going on finding an inspector. I actually usually send my buyers maybe 2 or 3 inspectors that I've worked with before and allow them to search their websites, find out their fees, find out what they may do that's over and beyond other inspectors, and then allow them to choose the inspector. And then I will call the inspector and line up the appointment. Or sometimes inspectors will have an online form where they can pay for the inspection up front. So exactly, you do it?
Yeah, I usually ask my buyers if they have a home inspector they like to work with.
Yes.
Is usually what I do. Most often a buyer is like, no, I don't know anyone. I'm like, don't worry about it. Most people don't. I'm happy to make a recommendation. And again, I just want to touch on realtors. We don't get any sort of kickbacks from our inspectors that we recommend. I'm only recommending them because I've been through many home inspections with them and know they do a really good job. I know they present the information in a really great way. They're incredibly thorough. They write a nice report that's easily digestible. So it's not based on any sort of kickbacks. It's just because they're really fantastic. And we have the benefit of dealing with multiple home inspectors over the course of the year or years,
Yeah.
right? So that's usually how we make a recommendation. And I like to schedule it because it is important there's a lot of people that need to know about the home inspection that maybe my clients, the buyers, wouldn't just be aware of for informing. So that's typically what I like to do. Of course, there can be variances.
Right.
And so who typically pays for the home inspection and when is that payment due?
So generally the buyer will pay for the home inspection, and in some cases it's due at the inspection. Some cases they want your credit card prior to the inspection to reserve the appointment. The buyer generally pays for the home inspection, but then that belongs to them. It is their information.
And something I always like to look at it too, of course you want the home inspection for possible negotiations. And one thing I do want to touch on quick, maybe your husband's a builder or your wife's a builder and has some sort of experience with that. We really do want a third party inspecting the home if you intend to ask for any sort of concessions. So we have occasionally had buyers who felt very savvy with inspecting the home themselves, but they were also very aware that if there was anything we wanted to ask for, they would need to have a third party ask for it because it's kind of, as you said, if you're just doing buyer to seller negotiations. So.
Home inspectors actually are licensed. So they have to go through a course. They have to maintain continuing education credits. And they are responsible or accountable to an organization. So they also there's certain number of things that they have to do. For example, in every room, they have to test at least one outlet. Well, if my dad was an electrician and he felt very confident about that, but he didn't test all the outlets, he just went out to the electrical box. Well, he might have missed that this outlet doesn't work or it was never connected or whatever. That's part of the reason that you hire a home inspector. They're also licensed, bonded, and insured. Mm-hmm. So if anything happens while they're inspecting versus
a buyer inspecting for themselves, you would then be on the hook.
When the buyer's like, hey, this faucet is loose, and then all of a sudden, and then leak. Now we've got a little bit of a problem. Yeah. So the home inspector, licensed, bonded, insured, also accountable to a state regulatory board. I'm not, that's probably not the right verbiage, but yes, they're responsible to somebody about how they do their home inspections.
And they're methodical, right? So there is a system to it, and they're really great about walking you through the home. The other reason I really like having a home inspection, it's a great homeowner's manual. So you don't know this house yet, right? You're getting to learn it. They will tell you where the main water shutoff valve is, where your gas valve is, how to not disconnect electrical, but they will walk you through the home and give you that kind of homeowner's tutorial where if you're not totally sure where something is, pull out that home inspection and it might point you in the right direction.
Well, and usually they'll give you the exact age of the mechanicals. They'll take the serial number off the furnace and be able to tell you, hey, this furnace was put in 20. Mm-hmm. Oh, great. Didn't know that. Now you know how old your furnace is. That's a good thing.
And I think, to me, mostly it's money well spent. I don't think it's a time to skimp on getting a home inspection. I would say they can typically range from, let's say, $500 upwards of $3,000 to $4,000, depending on how much you're getting inspected and what type of home. Which kind of leads us into our next question, which is what type of inspections are you recommending your buyers do?
Right. So I think very typical for residential housing here in Montana, or specifically Bozeman, I guess, is certainly just a regular standard home inspection, then also radon and mold. You could, depending on what type of property it is, Kaila and I talked about this, about surveys. While technically not an inspection, it is a confirmation of where your lot lines are. That's not typically required in a regular residential subdivision, but if you're buying a more rural property, or if you plan on fencing your property for animals, you want to make sure you know where your lot lines are. So that might be something that you would do, or you could negotiate with the seller to provide to you.
I think it's really just taking stock of what type of property are you buying. So a big one to me, again, we've talked about well and septic a little bit. If you are buying a home that's in an older subdivision that maybe isn't on either a community system or city services, I do think it's worthwhile to have those systems inspected, because putting in new septics can certainly be a costly thing. Not something you maybe see a ton, but again, you want to be aware, if you're buying a home, what's coming down the pipeline potentially.
Right.
And same thing for your well services. Usually, I would say typically the water's very good around at least the Bozeman area. But again, let's double check. Let's make sure before we purchase a home that we're happy and or at least aware of what's going on with those systems, that they're crucial to a home's function, right? You can't live in a home that doesn't have either one of those services. So a really big ticket item for me.
I think that water test too, people not from the area might be a little surprised. While Montana does have a lot of good water, Montana was also a lot of ranch land. So there are different areas where it had previously been farmed or agricultural or something like that, and there might be high levels of certain phosphates or arsenic or something like that in the water. So water tests, if you're not on city sewer and water, might be top 3.
Just to make sure. And again, really to me, I've had a lot of buyers ask me, well, what inspection should I do? And again, I am going to turn it back on them and say, well, I recommend these basic ones. Again, what are you planning to do with the property? What is important to you about your property? So I think, again, really having a good understanding of that will help guide you in those choices. And then I think the last one, inspections can certainly be high anxiety, high stress time. So how do you help your buyers manage that?
So I think for buyers, number one rule, and it's a little bit the same for buyers and sellers, but don't stress out. If there is something found on the inspection, even if the buyer says, hey, first of all, in terms of the inspection, there's health and safety issues, and then there might be some aesthetic issues or some issues of obsolescence.
Cosmetic.
Right. So I think that it's important to keep your mind on the health and safety issues primarily. And if that's the case, remember that the seller, once you've exposed a health and safety issue to a seller, it's not that they don't have a choice, but now they are also aware of it. And even if they were to stay in the home themselves, they would have to correct the problem. So trying to get the seller to correct some of these health and safety issues is usually not a problem. There are different ways to have that issue resolved, whether that's a credit or an actual repair, but there are different ways to have that resolved. I know Kaila and I both agree that we always recommend, if it's the right thing for the buyer, but to take a credit rather than have the seller make the repair themselves, or the seller hire a handyman or whoever is required.
Their uncle.
Right.
That's why we recommend you want to be in charge and responsible of the repairs so that they're done to your satisfaction for the home that you are now going to assume ownership on.
Right.
So that is typically why we would recommend asking for a credit. It's also easier for a seller. They want to just be out of the house, be done. Maybe they've already packed and left and they're in another state. Who knows? That's often a more palatable request for someone versus an actual repair. I think it's also in a buyer's best interest.
I absolutely 100% in the buyer's best interest. Let's say there is a roof issue, something like that. Well, the seller might be more than happy to credit you $5,000 to $10,000 for that roof repair. If you happen to have a best friend that's a roofer, it might cost you $3,500, but in the meantime, you've just saved yourself $6,500.
Yeah.
So these things can all be worked out, and sometimes it works out quite advantageously for you. So again, I think don't stress. We can make it through most things, with the exception of, some of the major if there was a flood or a fire, we might have to delay close.
And I think to me, what I always tell people with inspections is keep in mind for you as a buyer, while it is rare, you can also walk away from the property. So if there is too much going on with it and you don't want to deal with it in any way, shape, or form, this is our time to pack up, get your earnest money back, and start looking for something else. So there's a lot of options when it comes to the inspection period. Again, totally leaving, closing, terminating the deal, or negotiating, or simply just moving forward if the home seems to be in a really good condition. So lots of options for you and just being aware of what those are. I think that's all the questions I have, and we will see you in the next episode where we will be talking about steps before closing.
Thank you.